Okay, so good afternoon from Paris. Good evening for you. You know, that's a great pleasure to meet you again for this first session of the week, which is also number 6 session of this M&A course. This week we have 4 sessions. We have a session every day up to the end of the week. Today, session 6, session 7 on Thursday, that means tomorrow, session 8 on Friday, and session 9 on Saturday. The only difference is timing. Session 6, 7, and 8 will be taught or are taught in the afternoon for me, in the evening for you. And on Saturday, it will be for you between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. And for me, it is in the morning, early morning for Saturday, 8 to 11 a.m. Okay. So that's what we have to do. So if you remember what we did last time, we were working on the Nabisco case, it was session 5. We already started with this case, which is a very large case in many topics, involved. In the preceding session, it means in session 4, with a presentation of firms involved, with also the vision, strategy, core business of Danone, and short analysis of the market, which is in food industry, of course, mainly in the biscuit industry. And last time we had several topics, topics about dilution, one of the most important questions in that kind of financial operations, the legal dimensions, the organization also of a negotiation when it is a large negotiation, which is a friendly one, okay? And we spend time on the agenda, how to work, how to organize a team, what do we mean with apprenticeship, all that kind of questions. And then we move to the financial resources management, how to finance the deal. And we understood something very specific, and I will come back later in the session at that point, which is we didn't validate, in fact, what you find in your textbook in Burke and DeMarzo and other textbook, and that's specific to Burke and DeMarzo. It means we had steps, and to consolidate and refinance this large operation, it was organized or scheduled, segmented into 3 different steps on an 18-month period. It's not in one day, it's 18 months, which is quite different. And I went very quickly on a few more points after this presentation, which was the last minute of the last session. So we will come back on these points. So what do we do today? What is the plan to go through today? First, I will come back on the Nabisco case in the last slides, how to organize a company to go into M&A operation on this investment or joint ventures. I just showed you a slide last time. I have to go into the details. Second, I want to say a few more points, on the optimization, tax optimization in international operations. You have to learn something on that. And also a few more words on the problem of the goodwill, which is in many operations now one of the key points in the accounting process after the negotiation. So let's make the first one. We will have a look also to our set of slides. One of them you already received them and I didn't use it. They are called BSN Danone Nabisco. It's a short summary of all the topics we went through. And I think that is very useful. It will be other than second step. The second step on BSN done on Nabisco, and we have another case, and I said a few words on that too in my presentation on the concentrations in cartels in Europe. It is the Perrier case. Perrier case. I want to show you some elements of this Perrier case, which is a good illustration of these on the concentrations, and also which is a good example, very complex, again, very complex deal with two listed companies connected one to the other and submitted to several hostile takeover bids. It is complex as some other cases I will show you, and some of them met like Saint-Gobain BSN. Then in the last part of the session, we will move to the beginning of the another topic, which is one other economic sector, which is the banking sector. And we'll start with two very short set of slides to make a presentation. And after that, if I have time available, I will start with HSBC and some elements on HSBC policy, deals, and disinvestment. So this is the program for today. So that means tomorrow we go further on the banking sector with other cases, particularly BNP Paribas, and two others. First, a very French one, but you should understand what it means. Crédit Agricole, Crédit Lyonnais, and a very international one, which is called ABN AMRO. ABN AMRO is a Dutch bank submitted to hostile offer by a consortium made of 3 other banks. At the time, the number two in the UK, RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, the number 1 in Belgium, Fortis, and the number 1 in Spain and some Latin American countries, called Santander. And today, Santander is number 2, at least in terms of market value in Europe, after BNP Paribas is number 1. So that's for the next steps. I will try to make it clear several times at the end of the session today and at the beginning of the session tomorrow, of course. So let's come back to this, what we call Nabisco case here. And what I wanted to show you first is at the end of these slides here, completely at the end. So I hope you see the slide. Still the same, acquisition, Nabisco, European subsidiaries, and so on. But what I do here is that I want to go back with you on the last case slides, which are 25.1, 25.2, and 25.3. And the question is really quite important. It is if you are regularly involved in that kind of operation, and it is clear that the number of M&A operations will increase in the years to come in Vietnam. Of course, in the financial sector, you have too many banks, and also in the non-financial sector, because the economy is growing, you need rationalization, more interaction with foreign investors. Vietnamese firms will invest more outside Vietnam also. So that means a tremendous increase in the number of operations, acquisition, of course, hostile and friendly, mergers, disinvestment, joint ventures, also spin-off. Also, sometimes I will say later a few words on spin-off. So anyway, in any case, if you are involved regularly in that kind of operation, you need to be prepared. and you need to have some kind of knowledge of how to manage a negotiation and of what to do afterwards. It means the main difficulty starts really when you have signed the contract, not before. So what you find here on the screen, if you see this slide, it's 25.1 external growth organization before the operation. Okay. So we understand, and you will understand also in the banking sector with BNP Paribas tomorrow, this is a kind of constant investment into the organization, into the expertise of a member of the teams also, and constant investment in what we call intelligence today, intelligence of a market, of a target, of a firm also able to launch, takeover bid on your firm. So the first element here is really the MEA structuration, how to organize what we call the intelligence analysis and the potential missions, you know. That means we should have a kind of 360 degrees, you know, constant view and analysis of the target and potential bidder. Okay, and nearly all the firms I've seen or worked for as a consultant also organized their intelligence in taking into account the relative importance of the firms which were identified. That means in that case, for example, we have about 10 firms, depends, 10 to 12, depends on the situation. This is moving, of course, but yeah, this is the average number, which are supposed to be important. No? And it is defined as a red zone, you know. In fact, in these 12 firms, you find two categories of firms. The first one is a very limited, but a few firms which are not target, but which are comparables, which are benchmarks. And clearly, for BSN Danone, it is Nestle. It was Nestle 20 years ago. It is still Nestle today. Nestle is the benchmark in terms of PE, in terms of return on equity, in terms of return on assets, in terms of diversification policy. Okay. Very often, it has been moving over time, but there is a second one, which is a benchmark. And the second one today is completely different from what Nestle is. It is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has a great strength. You know, if Coca-Cola launched, for example, a takeover bid on Danone, the impact on the concentration level on the different markets where they produce or sold their products, sell their products, will be very limited, because, you know, the only interaction is on the water bottles. All the other products, you know, are not in competition between the two firms. So the question is mainly on the diversification policies in terms of continent for Coca-Cola and diversification of portfolio of product. Also, are they interested in their products, baby food and medical food? So this is the question. So today, and I met one of my friends who is in charge of these intelligence today. They just have these two companies. Years before, they had also Unilever, for example. They had also PepsiCo. But they analysis today show that they are not really benchmarked. They are too different. They have moved their portfolio of activities, of products, and they don't have the necessary cash to pay for a hostile offer on Danone. So this is the first category, two benchmarks. All the others are targets. They are targets, and in terms of targets, what you find is generally nearly only medium-sized firms, sometimes large medium-sized firms. In many cases, most of the cases, they are family-owned or controlled. They are also, for most of them, in the what we call the pillars of the group today, which is water, dairy products, medical food, baby food, and they are targets in order to enlarge the market share of a group in a country where the group is already producing and selling products in these 4 different branches. So this is not a question of diversification. This is a question of increase of the market power, perhaps diversification of the products, but inside, each domain I nominated and underlined. So these groups, so these firms are followed regularly, for some of them nearly daily, because after our first analysis, it was the conclusion was that sometime probably we look for either a partner, an ally, or a buyer. And when in the market, for example, if you consider the baby food market in Germany today, where the competition is mainly with Nestlé, there's a target which is identified clearly by the market and by our competitors. But the group doesn't want this target to be bought by another company. So this intelligence process is such that we have a good knowledge, the team in charge have a good knowledge of these firms, and is organized in order to catch as quickly as possible all the information, not only in finance, but also on the management, on the new products, on the customers, on the organization, restructuration of subsidiaries, of departments, and so on, of this target. That means if there is an operation open or coming, it's very easy to understand what to do, what kind of offer can be made, what kind of proposal could be of interest also for the present managers and shareholders of the company. So this is very central into the organization, very, very central. However, this doesn't mean the group is not open to any other potential operation. This is the red zone. This is a priority. But after that, we have several levels, generally 2 levels of identification, with what is called orange and yellow zone, where you find a large number of firms. Some of them are new companies, very young companies, particularly in emerging markets. Some of them are only part of companies, departments or subsidiaries, because you find also groups which we sell some of the subsidiaries or departments in order to concentrate on a more limited core business, as Danone is also doing. Okay, So you have in this orange zone, generally between 80 and 100 firms all over the world, or part of firms, or subsidiaries of firms, or subsidiaries of groups, which could be of interest. And they are followed regularly, but not every day, as the, let's say, 12 of the red zone. This is the first point. This is probably one of the most important points, you want to go through what we call M&A. Second, it is the development of the ability to evaluate situation and react quickly. You understood what's happened here in the Nabisco case. One of the strengths of the group was to move very quickly. There was an announcement by Mr. Kravis, the chairman of KKR, and immediately, the board here in Paris of Danone met. But anyway, the different scenarios were already started before, because Nabisco Europe was one of the group of firms, subsidiaries of the group also, which are in the red zone, and was studied day after day by one of the team dealing with M&A. So the capacity to make a real evaluation of the situation was prepared by the team in charge of the intelligence and M&A before, and the only thing to do was to make a decision what to do. Was it to make a proposal immediately? Was it to organize a meeting before, and why? And you know what the answer was here. It was decided, the day after the announcement by the board that the CEO of Danone and the main representative, the main shareholder, Banque Lazare, will fly to New York City to meet as soon as possible. It means 2 days after Mr. Kravis. And the goal here was to negotiate not on the price, not on even on the characteristics of an operation, and to say, okay, we understand you want to resell these subsidiaries you have acquired a few months ago. We understand that you want cash because you need cash, because your debt equity ratio is very, very high. Yeah. We understand also you want this cash as soon as possible because you have to pay interest on that. So our proposal is very clear. We start immediately the process of due diligence, which will be followed by the negotiation. We agree on the limit to the length of these 2 steps, and that was the agreement on June the 6th, if you remember. And as soon as we sign, we will start the process of payment, and you will be paid cash in dollars, US dollars, in New York City 2 days after the signature. So that was the proposal. But if we agree on that, you have also to accept that during this period of time, you will not negotiate with any other company. We have a kind of monopoly on the negotiation with you during a period of several weeks, in order to try to reach an agreement for us to buy your subsidiaries in Europe and for you to get the cash. So this ability, to value the situation, to assess all the elements is based on the fact the firms have been studied before, and they are very well known by at least part of the team. And that we have also a structure, which is a board or reduced limited part of the board, which is ready to meet anytime and to make a decision. And in that case, it was probably the key to the success. If you consider the potential competitors who are mainly United Biscuits, a British group, and Balzen, a very well-known German company, they were not able to do that just because they didn't have this intelligence analysis structure so developed as it was with as it is today, and the organization to deal with an announcement and to make very quickly an assessment of the situation and a decision. So this is something which has to be trained. Teams have been trained. The structure has to be also improved regularly in order to make the best decision in a very short period of time. The third point, and we didn't go through that kind of element, is the preparation of internal and external teams. What does it mean? It means when you deal with large operations, large is what negotiated very large operations, it is a bit different for hostile. You have a negotiation with a large team. We were about 35 members in New York City during the negotiation. Was about the same number of staff on the other side. That means you meet for several days. Generally, several days means day and night. Very often it is in a hotel. So you have to be very well organized, very well structured. And also the teams, your team has to be trained to this negotiation. It's not because you say at the time you make the decision to go to New York, okay, we need auditors, we need bankers, we need controllers, our internal auditors, some engineers, and so on. And you put all these persons in one plane, but you will succeed. That means they have to be prepared to work together. First, you have to be very clear on what are the expertise you need. You have to identify before. When I say before, it's for different kind of potential deals. The experts you need, you have to identify if you get the expert inside the group, or if you need to have a consultant from outside. So that means today, for example, the group is ready to design a team for negotiation of that category, very large, in the dairy products, but also in the baby food or in the water supply. And they are not exactly the same ones. And what we see also, understand from experience, is that we need external members in the team. First, we need external member. If you remember the slide on with the schedule, in order to bring their expertise and also their analysis of the sector at the time of due diligence. And we use, for example, in that deal, consultants, McKinsey. And we had also 2 persons from McKinsey with us in New York City. That means they are McKinsey staff which are often, involved in deals in the food industry. That means they have an experience, they have a good knowledge of the main competitors. They have a good knowledge also of the main elements of the last deals in this industry. And they can bring comparisons. It means added value to a team. Of course, we need also at least one representative from the main auditor. Otherwise, it was PricewaterhouseCoopers, in order to follow the consequences in terms of accounting with the financial team inside of a deal. It means, in fact, what they will be ready to sign and not ready to sign, which is a key question. We need also, even if it is in the US or US-based firm, which is very well known in the group, it was not the first operation, but we need, a legal advisor, and we need also a tax expert from American consultants. So that means out of the 35, we had probably something like 14 or 15% from outside, but who were involved in different operations with groups. And for some of them, had good experience in the food industry also. That means at the time, you put all these persons in the plane to New York City, they know how we will work together. They know each other. It's already a team. It's easy to manage in terms of expertise. They know what they will do, what they will bring into a negotiation, which will be short, in fact, even if it is 5 days. So that's what's really happened. So that means if you want to succeed in, let's say, M&A, you need to identify potential teams from inside, but also from outside. You need to develop good relations with your main, let's say, consultants in strategy, but also auditing, taxes, and so on, and to bring to enlarge your cooperation with them, operation after operation. Somehow, these auditors, experts in strategy, lawyers, they are somewhere between outsiders and insiders. That's what's really happened and what you have to build. You need also, and we know that we have analyzed this element several times. You need also to, this is what is written here, create emergency loan capacities. What does it mean? It means you never know. You never know if you will make an operation in weeks or days, months, or even years to come, but you have to be prepared to that. You have to be prepared to that. Then you know what are the conditions. First, to accept that the calculation of the WACC optimization is not done anymore, or is not done only on a short-term period, but with a long-term horizon. Because it is clear that if you succeed in making good operations, good M&A operation, you will increase different returns, performance of a firm. But we also know that to reach that, you need to make mergers and acquisitions and develop ventures, and you need cash. You need cash. And we know that it's not, because no, it is not always possible to pay in shares. But in most of the cases, you pay in cash, and you have to be prepared to that. So what to do? It's first to manage your debt equity level ratio. And you know that the position of this group, which has been growing mainly by acquisition for the last 50 years, it's still to have a debt equity ratio between 25 and 30%. If you have a kind of myopic analysis, you will say it's not a good strategy. We have to increase the debt equity ratio up to a certain limit, of course, the limit which is such that the rating will not be modified, and of course, the weighted average cost of capital will decrease. But we accept in the short term to have, weighted average of capital which is not optimal in order to be able to develop this policy of M&A, which will bring higher returns in the future. Okay. So, but you have also, if you do that, be sure that you will get the liquidity when it is necessary. And this is what I've already described several times, which is the use of what we call MOF, multiple option facilities, which are line of credits. It means, in fact, liquidity option, a call on banks, several calls of banks, with very often, when you are an international player, options on currency, because you don't know if you will pay in dollars or in euros or in Japanese yen or in another currency. So this has to be negotiated, renegotiated according to the circumstances of the debt market, and of taking into account also the situation of the bank, mainly their liquidity situation, and regularly. And we need also to do something on the capacity and possibility to pay in shares. We know what are the pros and cons of payments in shares. It means when you pay in shares, remember that you don't pay in cash. It means if you have cash or the capacity to obtain new debt through, for example, multiple option facilities, you don't use it, and you can use it later. It's a kind of protection or preparation for your future negotiation. But at the same time, generally, you to be able to pay in shares, you issue new equity, new shares, and that means dilution. In most of the cases, when it is done regularly, dilution of wealth, that is in the short term, and dilution of the control for the original group of shareholders. So we know the pros and cons. But if the vision as it is here of the original family is not to a priority for the control, but it is a priority for their own wealth and the development of the group. If they accept that, if the control is not number one or number two, but number three priority, the third one, that means, they can pay in shares and issue new equity when it is possible. But we have to remember that the payment in equity itself is connected to two main variables. The first one is the financial environment, bullish or bearish market. You pay quite easily in shares when markets are bullish, but you don't pay in shares when markets are bearish. And the second one is the fact that you pay in shares in parts of the world, in countries you are well known, and your shares are traded. That means for this group, which is based in France and number 2 in Europe, after Nestlé, it is clear that in Europe, they can pay in shares. But outside Europe, it's much more difficult. There's a question of image. Image is not the same. The group is not as known, well known as it is in Europe. And also there's a problem of liquidity on the share, because the share is not listed in South America or in Asia. So all these points, are important. If you want to accelerate and to make good decisions, you have to deal precisely to invest time, energy, and expertise on these 5 points regularly. The second element here I wanted to come back. What's happened during the negotiation? If the negotiation has been prepared very well, you don't have so many problems of, I would say, finance or even tax or audit or accounting or law. Your problems are more with human resources management oriented. First, you have to be sure that the team with these 35 members, not only is the members are well chosen, but also are managed during the process of negotiation. 35 persons in the hotel for 5 days and 5 nights, they have to work according to checklists. That's what we already showed, with a vision which is clear of what we want to reach, what is essential, important, and what is secondary. So teams will be structured according to an agreement with the other party, and each member of the team should know exactly what he has to do or she has to do. That's also the reason why, one of the reasons why we have a transversal team which read all what is written, because in this contract, which are generally under the US law, all the pages, all the words written are part of the contract. So preparation, motivation, resilience, and after that you have to make a kind of immediate audit of what has been written. So this is, in fact, in detail, what I call number 2, control the different steps and quality of a decision process. So you need to really clear the guidelines, clear checklist, and a transversal team, which is made of several persons coming from different backgrounds. You need a lawyer there. You need also a person with an experience in the economic sector, for example, the biscuits industry, to understand what it means when operations are described or factories are described. And you need also a person involved in taxes. Third point, you have to manage conflicts. So it's not only preparation, it's not only organization, it's not only validation, audit of what is written, but it's also to management the teams. You have teams, they are very tired, they have been flying from Europe, they are in a hotel, they work 15 or 16 hours a day, they are stressed, So, of course, all these elements are source of conflicts with the member of the other team, but also between them in your team. So you need here someone I didn't mention up to now, which is person which is able to manage that kind of situation. It means it can be a member of the human resource management if he has this kind of expertise, or it can be a consultant also. You will find a few consultants which are great experience in that kind of management process in teams of very clever and good members, but which are tired, which are stressed, and we need, of course, to manage very quickly this situation in order to be sure that the goal will be reached at the end of the process. We need also to limit risk. If zero risk doesn't exist in your own life, in your firm, in particular in that kind of operation, but you're trying to limit risks. So what to do to limit risk on this operation? What can happen? First you have these slides we went through of what we call guarantees. And generally you have a kind of general guarantee on the operation itself, which is here very large. It is for 50% of the total level of the deal, total about to 50% of the deal. But you have also specific guarantees on the points which are either not very clear at the time of negotiation, or could be difficult because potential evolutions have not been identified. And among them, you find, of course, this problem of brands here, because there is a split, in fact, between the activities of Nabisco in America and in Europe. You find also these problems of pensions, which could be very costly if you don't hedge the risk. You find also problems on companies you buy with a perimeter which has been modified in the last few months. That's happened very quickly. The seller want to keep a factory, want to fix a headquarter, and so on. And you have only pro forma accounts. You don't have audited accounts, at the time of the deal. Also, you have to limit some categories of risk, which could be on products which are under difficulties in some countries with consumer associations. That's happened, but it doesn't happen here. It's happened very often. So you have to negotiate, to identify them first, and to negotiate guarantees, hedging policies for the different risk. So you understand that during the negotiation, it's not anymore finance, in fact. It's management, it's motivation, it's how to deal with conflicts. This is also to manage properly the different steps of the decision process. And this is after that risk management, the transversal team, by two here, but also different policies in order or different guarantees to limit the different other risks, like pensions, for example, or accounting risks. So this is the second one. And the third point here, is what we have been through. And all the persons with experience in different operations acquisitions or merger, this is the same problem here. So the main problem is not what you do in terms of preparation or during the time of negotiation. It is mainly what you do after, post-closing. Now, you have signed. Now, what do? You have to integrate, if you are a buyer, or if you are a merger, and take the control, management, you're in charge of management, you have to integrate, the different, the two firms which merge, or to integrate the acquired firm into the bidder. So, and this is quite difficult. So you have several points to take into account. First, this is the integration into all the processes: accounting, control, reporting, financial, cash management, and so on, one after the other. So this is integration, financial integration, but it is also what we call operational integration. And operational integration means integration of all the business units, whatever they are, departments, subsidiaries, and not only in finance, but in marketing, in production, in other fields. Operational integration. One of the main points, which is a consequence of this integration, is the problem of the budget processes. Generally, you choose the budget process of the acquirer or the most important company into the merger process, and you have to integrate the other one into this process. That means we have to move from the second firm or second department has to move from its own process to the new process. So we are very carefully doing that. It has to be explained to the team who just moved that it will be an improvement. It's not only a burden. That the capacity to manage afterwards will be better, easier, which is not always so clear. But you have to do that. Second, you have a problem with planification system. So it depends on the industry, because planification systems are very different from one industry to the other. They are much more important and detailed, and industries with long payback periods like Siemens, steel, car, and so on, if you compare to the food industry. But anyway, planification processes could be very different. Some of them are still very classical, based on the production system. Some others are completely different, based only on cash flow production. Some others, are quite new, and I tried to explain that already, which means they don't start with data. They start with kind of innovative or innovation step, where the different teams, even in different subsidiaries, are involved in the process of, at the same time, criticism of what's happened, but also are searching for new ideas without, in the first time, any kind of quantification. So this is planification process, which is based mainly on creativity, criticism, and creativity, which is very different from the volume planification you find in centralized firms or centralized states. And you have to integrate that. So very often the choice is a choice of the acquirer, but this is also an opportunity, because sometimes when you have your acquire, you are you buy a firm which is much more advanced in terms of modernization of all these process, budget, operations, planification, and you have to identify it and to generalize the best one. Third point, it's also to take into account each company's history and culture. And this is very important also. This is very important. And even countries are very close one to the other in terms of culture, I had opportunity to work on acquisitions of made by this firm, this group in Italy, and it was not so easy because these Italian firms we bought were family-owned firms, very very local, with very tight relations between the staff and the CEO and the family of the CEO, and we were an international group with principal organization, which was nearly the same in all the countries. And this was very difficult to make our organization acceptable by the staff of these family-owned firms. So generally, you find two difficulties, even in countries which are very close to your original country. The first one is the size. It's easier to integrate after an acquisition or in a merger process a firm which is about the same size, because with the same size, generally the process of similar when we are in the same industry. This is much more difficult to integrate, medium-sized firms, family-owned, and very often, it takes time. It means you have to explain, to re-explain again, to integrate some of the members of the new company, new subsidiaries into your teams in order to do that together. So size is also a dimension to be taken into account. Ownership. If you buy a company which is a family-owned company, 100%, third generation, very local, in a very small city, it's very difficult for them to catch, the vision, the values of the group, which is international. It's very far from them. So it's pedagogy. You have to teach them what is the culture and what this new culture will bring them individually and also to their subsidiary. You have also to control refinancing schedule, which is what I showed. It has to be done clearly with clear goals, what hope we did. I hope the students didn't lose too many minutes, of the presentation. I was here in that slide when it was disconnected. So remember what I did? I went through the slide number 25, 1, 2, 3, and tried to cut back on how to organize M&A operations first. And I said at the beginning of the session today that I will go into two main points, which are very essential in M&A operation. The first one, but it is, I would say, mainly for large companies, but some of you are probably involved already in large operations, and you will be involved in the next future. So what is the problem in general? The problem is that you have somewhere the head of a group. Here it's called BSN. And the head of a group is a holding company. It means a company without any production, commercial operations, activities, but only with a limited number of staff. What I mean limited, it depends on the size of the group, but it can be from 10 to 200. But we are dealing only with finance, control, stock markets, taxes, that kind of problem. Okay, strategy. And this company is generally the listed company. It means when you say Danone, or you say Nestlé, or you say Unilever, or Coca-Cola, it's a company like this one, which is a company with a small balance sheet, because the size of the balance sheet is, of course, connected to the level of assets, and the level of assets here is very limited. And this holding company controls all the other company through different kind of networks. Remember what we did on BSN and Saint-Gobain? After the acquisition, after the failure of this operation and the decision of BSN to develop horizontal acquisitions, in the glass industries, they bought 10 or 11 firms and restructured these firms under 3 holding companies. And these holding companies, control operational companies. So what means you have several levels: the headquarters, intermediate holdings, and then operational firms. Okay, and this is what you find here. You have several holding companies. These holding companies are here. The intermediate holding companies: Compagnie Gervais Danone, General Biscuits, and BSN Finance. And after that, you find operational firms, French companies, foreign companies. So you have a complex organizations, right, with holding companies and operational companies. Very often, when you are based in France, like BSN, but you go in a country like the UK, for example, you create a holding company for management of the operational firms in Britain, and Jacobs was one of them. But of course, BSN UK was controlling, or is controlling, several firms inside the UK. So you find also holding companies per country, at least per large countries, I would say. After that, you find also very specific companies which are dedicated to a specific points. And here you have an example, and the example is BSN Services, which is holding company in Belgium, and dealing only with cash management operations. Why to do that? Because, among the European countries, Belgium has a specific law which facilitate these operations, or at least which limit the taxes made on the profits on these operations. So that means the scarce of organization, is explained first because they want to isolate the strategic financial operation of a large definition from the commercial and the production operation. So that's the explanation of the fact you have a holding company, which is the company which is also negotiating with the governments, negotiating with the stock market, negotiating with the banks. Okay. After that, they are very often they buy small groups or small groups, very often family controlled. And what is bought, is not the operational firms, but it is the holding company of these family-owned firms, which is invested into operational firms. Compagnie Gervais Danone is a holding company, and they own production companies in dairy products, for example, but also in desserts. Remember that, for example. General Biscuits, is also a holding company. It was listed in the market under the control of the family, and all several very well-known brands produced in different firms which are subsidiaries of General Biscuit. So operational firms were below, in fact. Okay. So what is bought now is only shares of the holding company, which is the head of the family-owned group. And after that, very often for tax reasons or for management reasons, it is decided to keep at least some of these holding companies. So you can still find sub-holdings, in fact, below BSN, the headquarters. After that, you understand that it is easier to manage in a country when you have a head in the country, a company leading the operations in the country, which is the case, for example, for BSN UK. There is a team with managers dealing with financial operations, relations with banks, relations with authorities, cities, government in the EU, and then their own production companies. And you find these very specific company. In the case of cash management, it's very often used even by medium-sized group. So at the end, the structure becomes very complex. And if it is very simplified here, if we had a look at what find in a group like BSN Danone, it's about 350 companies. That means after that, the management is very complex. The optimization is a key process in terms of net earnings after taxes. Okay, and also, it's facilitates, not only fiscal optimization, but also strategies of investment, disinvestment. It means, for example, if BSN Danone decided to sell all the operations in Britain, they will not sell company per company probably, but they will sell the shares of BSN UK. It means we will cut the link here between these companies and the group itself. Okay. So it was just a few points, on that. I think it's quite important here to understand that this is the evolution when you become more international and become bigger, larger. And that's facilitated also the disinvestment policy for joint ventures or the splits. Another point I wanted to come back, I said a few words on that, but I think it has to be, this has to be extended. In fact, there are problem of valuations. We had the course together in valuation first. And you have 2 points here. The first one is how to split an amount you pay for several firms, to buy several firms. How do you split that? And the second point will be afterwards the problem of the goodwill. So here it's a very good example of the application of the methods we went through together. The transaction was paid for $2,500 million. Very simple. Payment cash. But in the contract itself, it's not written the value of each of the 5 companies. It means it's only written the 2 groups, KKR Nabisco on the one side and BS& Danone on the one, agreed on the fact that BS& Danone will pay cash to $2,500 million and will buy 5 firms, Belin, Jacobs, Saiwan, Smith & Walkers. Nothing else. But of course, if you think to what happened afterwards, when you come back, to your headquarters and you say to the accountants, we have made this transaction, the question immediately is how much you paid for Belin, how much you paid for Jacobs, how much you paid for Saiwan, and so on. And you have to find a solution. And you don't have any kind of price or value in the contract itself. So you have to find a solution. And the solution is always the same. It means if you take Belin, for example, but it will be the same for the other companies. You will make a valuation of Belin as if it was an independent firm. It means you will come back with your methods, multiples, cash flows, and so on. And you will find several values for Belin, and you will find a range for Belin. You'll do the same for Jacobs, same for Saiwan, same for Smith, and same for Walkers. It means you have applied your tools or methods, and you get 5 range. And of course, remember that any point in the range is acceptable, feasible. The only constraint you have here is that when you choose one value as a price, or as a final value, if you prefer, for each company, the total of the value chosen should be equal to the amount you paid, $2,500 million. So the question will be not only to meet the 2,500 million, but perhaps to have a strategy of pricing. Do you think that, for example, have to take nearly the average in the range for each company? Or is it better to have different policies? For example, the policy of high price, for some of them and low price for some others. It will depend very much on what you do with these firms. And the position which has been accepted here by the auditors was the following one. All these companies, were bought, in fact, by different companies inside the groups. Belage, Jacobs were bought by French companies. Saiwan was bought by another Italian company, and Smith & Walkers were bought by a Dutch-based company, which is not an operational company, but a financial company. Why? Because Smith & Walkers were resold, as you know, very quickly to PepsiCo. And they were sold for a price higher than the price paid. And there was a profit made on the transaction. And the transaction was made by a Dutch-based company, which means in terms of tax on that kind of operation, they did not have to pay. It was a free tax operation. But the conditions were, of course, that these acquisitions were made by the Dutch-based financial company. So when you do that, the good choice is that your profits are very high in the Netherlands. And of course, because you need to reach a total of 2,500 million, very small for the French and the Dutch and the Italian companies. So that means if you come to the range, for Smith & Walkers, we used a price in the lower part of the range and the three others in order to limit the potential taxes if part of them were resold in the upper range. So it's clear application of what you know in terms of valuation, but which take into account, the fact that very often we don't have, a price in the contract. We have only one price for all the companies bought. And after that, this is your problem as a CFO to organize, the acquisition in order to reduce the potential taxes to be paid. So this is the first point I wanted to underline here. Second point is on the goodwill. Where is it? Lost it again. Yeah, so that's it. Here I am. Here I am with the goodwill. So what you understand when you have a final price, is that the final price doesn't meet with what you find in the balance sheet of the acquired company. And you have to find a solution because the total should be equal, of course, to what you paid. Okay. Have to be equal to what you paid. And the problem is with all these elements which are not taken into account, in parce que je pense qu'ils ont le même problème de l'autre côté. You have to be clear on what's happened, in the balance sheet and what is not taken into account. And of course, what is not taken into account is always the same element. There are classical elements which are not valued in the balance sheet because, in fact, they were taken into account year after year in the income statement. And in an industry like the food industry, it is mainly the brands. They come in other industries like the pharmaceutical sector. It is mainly research and development. Yeah. So the question is what to do in accounting. You have on one side what you paid, the 2,500 million US dollar, and on the other side you need something equal. The first thing you do is to have a look to the balance sheet of the 5 companies you bought. Okay. And here, if you have a look to the column, the 2 columns, the column called before, column called before, you have acquired capital equity, which is 1,294, which is a very small percentage, in fact, of the total price. This is the final price, after 2 companies will be sold. But that means that you have 6,902, which is not explained at all. Then this amount is not in the balance sheet of the 5 companies of the companies bought. So there's something missing somewhere. So the question is, what is it? And what do we do with that? So if you understand that industry is mainly concentrated on brands, and when you buy a food-based company, particularly the largest one, with very well-known product of the world, you can think to what is the value of Nestlé, for example. You have a look to make a calculation, you understand that more than 50% of the total value of the group today is made of brands. It's Nestlé, Nesquik, Nescafé, all of these brands. But these brands are not in the balance sheet. So it's not surprising you find quite a good goodwill, which are assets which are not incorporated into the balance sheet of the targets, which are very high, at least in terms of level, but also in terms of percentage. So after that, the question is to split this goodwill in different pieces. And we are mainly interested by brands. Because brands can be, for example, resold at a point in time. Many groups, large groups, they bought many companies. I said about 50 companies a year for this one, And they made an analysis of the brands which were acquired. Some of them are kept. Some of them are resold. And some of them are just left aside. No one wants to buy, and it's not useful anymore to invest in these brands. Okay, they are at the end of their life, for example. Okay, so we have 3 categories of brands, but anyway, for those to resell and those who are kept, at least, we need values. They are assets. And we have, after the brand, we have another part, and the other part is made of different elements, It can be trading activities. It can be market share. Market shares that can be industry are very important, So you pay for that. You pay to enter a market. You pay for market share. So you have to make the distinction, and it's not so simple to make the distinction. So it's generally decided, that the only interesting element is the brands, and we need a valuation of the brands. And what is required by the audit firms like EY or PricewaterhouseCoopers or Deloitte is to get a value by an expert, a consultant expert. And for each industry, you find one or two experts in the world. And for food industry, largest and very well-known expert is in London, based in London. It's called Interbrand. So you raise your problem, your question to Interbrand, you know. So for example, we bought, you know, Berlin. Berlin is a very well-known brand of biscuits in Europe. We want to know what is the value of Berlin. So Berlin is used for different biscuits in different countries. So Interbrand will calculate for you the value of the brand Berlin, country per country and product by product. And then they will send you reports, you pay for that, okay? And you will be able to use these values in order to integrate this value in your assets side, which will of course compensate the increase in equity. So the question after that is, what do you do with that? You know that the bonds are not submitted to depreciation as a car or production equipment, but that can be submitted depending on the way you apply the new rules to amortization or to a process of re-examination from time to time. After that, you get all the other elements, all these market shares, right to enter British market, for example, here. And this generally is either eliminated immediately by a reduction in total equity or depreciated on very short period of time, something like 3 years, you know. So that's what was done here. It was depreciated in a very short period of time. And the brand were also re-examined regularly according to the calculation of Interbrand. But that means when you are a group or firm with large number of brands, with a value which is based mainly or for a large percentage on your brands, you need to be very careful in these accounting integration after an acquisition or a merger. This is very central, you know, after that, in the financial analysis, in the measure of performance of a company. This is the most important thing. Okay. So we went through again, you know, the last 3 slides. We went through the structure of groups and the problems behind in terms of management and in terms of fiscal allocation and optimization. We said a few words on the goodwill. Perhaps if remember, I showed you these 2 slides here, 2021. This is, of course, for listed companies, but some of you are already involved in listed companies or in unlisted companies. Remember that here, when you make acquisition, divestment, or venture, generally, you know, there is a consequence on the price of a share. And the consequence is made of 3 things. The first one is an increase or a decrease of the price. And you can have a contradiction between the short-term movement and the longer-term movement. And this is what you see here. We have first an increase in the price. You have the announcement, you know, the market investor says, they have been very successful in their past in acquisition, which it's another great opportunity. So there was no analysis, nothing. And buyers are coming and the price is increasing. But of course, after a few minutes, they came back on the market because they have made a few calculation and they understood that it was creating this deal was creating a risky position. High debt equity ratio, perhaps problem of liquidity, problems of dilutions, perhaps at least in the short term, performance, and so on. And the price went down. So consequences of the price. Second, it's nearly always the case, whatever is the judgment, of the investors in the market on the deal, you have an increase in volume. Suddenly you find buyers and sellers more. The only fact you have the announcement of a deal bring new operators, investors, sellers, buyers. And the third one is that the consequences are not very well measured immediately. So you have contradictory positions. And that means that prices are moving up and down. Of course, you have a trend, and you see here on that slide, you move down from 741 to 691, but it's not a straight line. It is a straight line on my graph, but this is the long-term trend. If you have a look to everyday position or position inside the day, you will see, differences between the highest and lower price, which has been increasing since the announcement. So that means if volatility is increasing. So movement on the price, movement on the volume, movement on volatility. And that's the three main consequences you have to deal with when you are a CFO of a firm like this one. This is the conclusion we find here. Okay, so now let's have a short break, perhaps, and I will come back with some slide of conclusion on that before moving to something different. Okay, so let's have something like 5 or 7 minutes break, if you don't mind. Thank you. Je retrouve ça. Nouveau partage. Qui sont en Oops. Okay, I think it's time to start again after this short blank for the second part of this session. The first thing I want to do right now is to present you here a few slides. Yeah, it's a very limited number of slides. So I hope you see the slide. It's called BSN Danone Nabisco. You already received a slide. I think it was on the second session, but I don't use them. I have no time to do that. And it's a good presentation or summary of what we have done here on this case. I will go into the slide, the 4 slides, before moving to some other elements. So you have a first slide which underlines a few points. So when you are making mergers and acquisition, what should be your main goals? You don't have only one goal, in your policy, but you should have several. And acquisitions are mixed or connected with operational policies and financial policies. First point here, it's what I explained, at least twice. It is develop acquisitions or keep existing subsidiaries only if your company is or will become number 1 and number 2. And this priority is more and more common today. If you have a look to groups in different industries, this is one of the key points. You stand on the market if you are number 1 or number 2, because you are leading the market, because you have an impact of the price, because you have an impact of the margins, because you have economies of scale also, because your investment in marketing and communication is amortized on a large basis of activity. So if you decide not to keep, you have to disinvest. This is another part of the policy of M&A. Point 2 is select growing market, which often means country with an increasing number of inhabitants or consumers, particularly, of course, in B2C activities. Growing market, why growing market? Because the fact your market is growing is generally a protection against competition. It's the easiest one, because when you have a good growing markets, it means you have higher demand. And when you have higher demand, the problem is problem of production, not really a problem of competition. Well, competition is not as is weak. So choose large markets, growing markets, and of course countries with economies of scale. It means large quantities of buyers, consumers. Third, give a priority productivity policies. We have done this, of course. Progressively, competition will increase on the markets where you are. That means you need to decrease your cost of production, improving, of course, the same quality and quality at the same time in your market share. Productivity is really a key point. It depends on the country and the culture and the history, but it's more and more clear that you have to take into account all these goals, which are, of course, you take into account economic goals, and we know how to measure that. But other goals, like social goals could mean taking into account the staff, the conditions of life, the conditions of work, but also an interest for them, financial interest in the profits made by the companies. But you know today that it is more and more environment oriented, it's more and more also governance oriented. So progressively firms have to integrate that and have to integrate all these elements in their acquisition wherever they are in the world, but they have also to adapt to the priorities in the countries where they decide to invest. 5, you should train your teams to work quickly with zero mistake. This is summarized here by speed in the decision process, and train your team, your negotiation team, your intelligence teams. They are assets. They are an investment in the future quality, the success of the future deals. And 6, you need a working method. That's what we have seen on the different slides. You need to know what to do at each steps. You need a kind of checklist to go through. So cycle 1, in terms of finance, we have understood here that we have several problems to deal with, which are very, very central. Earning per share and share price. Remember that the earning per share is one of the key points in the decision. There was a slide on that, and the strategy was partly adapted, partly to resale after an acquisition. It's partly adapted to be a tradition, I would say, a recurrent tradition in the level of net earnings. You have to take care to the wealth and the control decision at the same time, which is very often complex, and also to the debt equity ratio, which has consequences, of course, on the weighted average cost of capital, but also on your debt capacity. And you have to protect this debt capacity with hedging policies like, of course, multiple option facilities. You need also to prepare and to learn about how to refinance a deal. How to be able to find the cash, how to negotiate the payment in several steps, for example, if you have a liquidity problem, how to consolidate your debt, how to decrease debt, asset sales, equity issues, convertible bond issues in order to postpone the dilution effect. We went through again, and let's have a checklist, but very important point in post-acquisition processes. If you go into your textbook, you will understand that this point is also not really clearly analyzed. Acquisitions are seen, analyzed by most of the author of these financial textbooks as investment. But you have a problem. Of course, you have problem valuation, but you have problem for lawyers, how to design the contract. What is the final buyer? The holding company, the buyer, several ones. Which one? What about fiscal optimization? That's what we probably we met a few minutes ago. What about guarantees? All the risks which can be taken into account into the contract. That's what we studied also a few minutes ago. In some deals, it is not the case really here. Some deals, if you have a slide on that, on the currency and exchange risk. What about the goodwill? Went through that also. The analysis, reanalysis of the core business and the potential disinvestment policy of part of the acquisition, but also of assets you developed or bought before. You modify, eventually you modify the perimeter of your operations. And then you have post-closing transactions. Other point, or have another way to have a look on the consequences after the deal. The steps, different steps to follow first. How to design financial package. And this is again the contradiction between the textbook and what's happened in large deals. It takes time. What about fiscal optimization? Not only short term, but long term. So that means the level of prices of companies you buy, the assets you buy, have an impact, immediate impact, but also a long term impact. Stock exchange impacts. Share price trend, volatility, volume. That's just what I explained. And I think it's important also to understand that. Final impacts on the accounts and the transaction price. And then learn or improve progressively. It's a learning process, an apprenticeship process, a good practice. So each time you make an operation, come back to your methodology of deal with the acquisition, sales, and so on, and try to improve it. It's always, it has to be improved regularly. So this is what I wanted to present you here, and so I'm going to move now to something different, which is the Perrier case. Yeah. So I hope you will see my slide on Perrier. Here. It is here. So I hope you see my Perrier case study. If you don't see my Perrier case study, just tell me. Remember what I said here and why I do that. Try to understand why I do that. I finished with Nabisco, all the consequences, good prices, warnings, methodology, apprenticeship, intelligence, okay? Teams management also. Perrier case is a different case. It's always here, done, but it's the last case on that, and don't worry about that. I choose this case, and I hope you see my slide. If you don't see my slide, just say I don't see my slide. It's a case with 19 different slides on an acquisition which was a hostile acquisition, and also one of the would say basis of the evolution of the concentration rules in Europe. If you remember my presentation on concentrations, 1957 Roma Treaty, 1977 they started in Brussels the first team. 1980-81 we have this Pilkington-Danone operation, which was not accepted by the common market authorities. Several steps. 1993 here, the Perrier case, which is the, I would say, the central case, and it brings also some more elements than the concentration operation. And then, if you remember, we had these two cases, Legrand Schneider and Tetra Laval Sidel, with you know, the decision coming at time from the courts, from the judges. Okay, so you shouldn't understand that at some point in time you will need arbitrage. In all these acquisition processes, on some complex cases, we need arbitrage, and they can be done by different authorities or different players. If we go back to BSN Saint-Gobain, it was a white knight. So at the end, the white knight was the decision maker. It was the authority giving the arbitrage. Second, the arbitrage can be made by the authorities, concentration of cartel authorities, national or European. Now, this is Pilkington, or this would be Perrier. But it will be done, it could be done also by a legal authority, which is a court generally. You will see here, there is a court decision. But after that, the first one is a court decision at the French level. There is a second decision, the arbitrage on the arbitrage by the European court decision. And you will see that in one of those cases we'll study next time, it is tomorrow, BNP Paribas case. The operation between three banks, hostile operation between three banks at the same time, were so complex that the arbitrage was made by the central bank. It means the governor of the central bank organized, a session with a committee and made an arbitrage between the three players. And you will understand also that in another case we see tomorrow, ABN AMRO, at the end of a process, which is very complex also, we have an arbitrage which is mentioned by part of it, at least by three governments together, Belgian, Luxembourgese, and Dutch government. So we need arbitrage processes. Now, this is one of the key points to understand here. The second point before going further is that, when you have complex structure and several players, it's very often difficult to find a solution by either negotiation and by the position of investors of the market. Negotiation one side, the market, they don't find a solution. So we have to find something else. And that's here where the courts will come back, and at the end where the Brussels authority will enforce the final decision. So this story is a story of a company, which is a Perrier company. And Perrier company is generally known for its bottles of water. But we have, and we'll come back, of course, in a minute on that, a complex organization. I have several arrows here, and probably you don't understand at that point what it is. Then we have several hostile operations. And I would say particularly here, we have at the end, 6 operations on 2 companies. We have a court coming in, French court. We have Brussels authority making another decision. And then you have a description of the different players in the operation of part of the assets in terms of local, regional springs of Perrier. You find also here some kind of summary of the activities of the 3 main players. You get after that some elements on the different investors. You will find summary of a problem with the legal dimension. Here, kind of schedule, restructured and simplified, in order that it is understandable. A few points on the objectives of the different industrial companies. The court rulings, what are we doing? The assumptions made by the regulator for Brussels authorities we already met. Their conclusion, the arguments of the lawyer of the 2 main investors, Nestlé and Danone, and the implementation of a final agreement. So everything is nearly written here, just in order you understand where you are and what we are doing. So let's have a look here. This slide is very central. What you find here is a company which is Source Perrier. And Source Perrier is the central element of the discussion and presentation. This is a company which is listed on the Paris stock market, and it is known for the brand Perrier and the bottle of sparkling water called Perrier, which is very well known in Europe and also in the US. Okay? So they own a spring in southern part of France. They produce bottles of sparkling water. But Source Perrier is also a company with other activities. And I went through very quickly these elements, and they are here. Yeah, that's here. And the portfolio of activities, operations is made of, in fact, 3 main elements. The main spring, Source Perrier, sparkling water. I would say regional springs, and you have a list of these regional springs. In fact, they have about 25 springs, and you have the most important one, 12 more, I would say, largest, producing the largest number of bottles. And they have their own brand, Murrer, Birdelaire, Rosanna, Chateauneuf, and they are located in different parts of the country. So limited capacity of production, a factory on each side, and regional distribution. But they have also a cheese producer If you are interested by cheese, this cheese is Cave de Roquefort, which is a very known cheese produced in the central part of the country, central south part of the country, Cave de Roquefort. So this is a group in the food industry, in the beverage industry at the same time. It is under the control of the family, but it is listed on the stock market. This is the first point. The second one here is that you find a company above with a very specific name, Exor. And Exor is a very interesting company. Exor is also listed on the market, but Exor is a firm which has been transformed over the years, and I think I get some information somewhere on that. If I find it. No, where is it? Anyway, Exor is a company which has moved over time. You will find it. It was created a long time ago. Exor was created in the 50s of the last century. But at that time, Exor was an operational firm, I would say a commercial firm, which owned supermarkets. At that time, it was mainly rather small supermarket. What you find in the central part of the cities right now, we are coming back to the old model. And they were very successful and make profits, because competition was limited and growth was very, very high rate of growth. This was in Europe, France and neighboring countries, 50s, 60s, 70s, beginning of 80s. And this firm, it was a distributor. It was a distribution network. Was created by a man called Monsieur Menzelopoulos, Greek origin, and he has a vision of what will be the supermarket and perhaps the hypermarket in the future. And it was very successful. And at a point in time in the 70s, he decided to make an IPO, and Exor was listed on the market. But he decided also that he wanted to do something else. He was successful in the distribution system. He decided to restructure Exor, created in 1948. In 1978, there is an IPO. In 1993, he decided to restructure the company. So Exor is listed on the market, but he decided to sell progressively or to resell the supermarkets one after the other. That means after 2 years, Exor was a listed company full of cash, but without any asset in terms of distribution. It was only cash and equity. And he decided with his cash to develop other activities, other kind of operation. He didn't want to be involved in distribution anymore. He thought that the best period was over and that he had to do something else. So Exor invested cash into 3 main assets, completely different, much more diversified. The first one here on the left side is Chateau Margaux, and Chateau Margaux is wine. It's Bordeaux wine. If you are familiar with wine, Bordeaux wine, good wine, Chateau Margaux is one of the best Bordeaux wine. And progressively, Chateau Margaux itself bought other vineyards in the region. Second one, real estate, right side. Completely different. This real estate investment, is mainly in the large cities, and among the large cities, mainly in the Paris area. Large percentage of offices, but also warehouses, logistics equipment. No flat. Were not interested by the family building. Third one was Source Perrier. Now, Source Perrier was controlled by a family, another one, and listed on the market. And Source Perrier had a large float and progressively decided to buy shares, and got, after 2 or 3 years, about probably 35% of shares. So, it's a good example of structuration. You have a company which is an operational company in the distribution network. It was listed, and progressively you resell the assets, get cash, 100% cash, and the cash is invested. It's not invested in assets you find in its balance sheet, but in shares which are bought in other companies. And he decided through this investment, you can call it acquisition if you want, to diversify instead of being involved in one sector only, distribution. Now is involved in wine production and sales, real estate, mainly for business, warehouses, logistics, and for offices, and offices also for business. And third, into shares of Source Perrier. And Source Perrier is diversified in different production. So that's the complete trend with several disinvestment and also acquisitions. During the meantime, he needed more resources because the investments made in Chateau Margaux, Source Perrier, and real estate were much more important than what he obtained from the sales of the distribution sets, and he made equity issues, and through the equity issues, new investors came, public, individual investors, investment funds. This is what is called here publicly held shares. And on the other side, this is the IFINT, and the IFINT, it's holding companies. It's holding companies based in Luxembourg for fiscal reasons, tax reasons, and controlled, owned by a group you heard probably, which is the Fiat Agnelli Group, based in Turin, Torino, in Italy. It's one of the largest, it's the largest producer of cars in Europe, lorries. It was also for years for large, up to 2010, 2012, it was the number one group in terms of size in Italy also, and they have merged recently with a French car group called PSA, which is Peugeot Citroën, based in the eastern part of France in Sochaux. And this Luxembourgish holding companies was created in to organize diversification policy. They were mainly in industry, cars, lorries, steel, decided at the point in time that it was necessary to diversify because, the growth was in other economic sectors, and we decided to move to food, beverages, tourism. And the investment in Exor was based on this analysis. So that means, at the time of the case, we have a situation here with Exor, with still the Menselopoulos family, about 40%, about 30%, 30 from IFINT, the Agnelli Fiat Group in Italy, and publicly held shares, individuals, but also investment funds, banks, for another 30%. So that means there is no majority here. There's no majority, okay? And the problem was at that point that one of the players, which is the Italian group, wanted to become the largest player. He wanted to have a dominant stake into Exor, rather than 30%, and we tried to find a way to make this acquisition of at least another 20%. Okay, this is what's happened, and we will start here with the first line of the operations. They decided, to make to launch a takeover bid on the shares of Exor. They wanted, in fact, to buy at least 20%, but there was no counterpart on the publicly held side with sufficient stake, and the Menselopoulos didn't want to sell in the beginning. They decided to launch a takeover bid, and this is what you see on slide number 4. They made an offer on Exor at a price of 1,320, 400% of Exor shares. So they were ready to buy all the shares presented at the offer, payment in cash, wherever they come, with a goal which is 20% at least. But if all the shares are presented to the offer, they will accept to buy all the shares. That was the situation. On that side, among the public, you find a bank which is very central here, which is Société Générale. And Société Générale, was in fact the most important investor through investment funds, but it was not participating at all in the governance of Exor. And of course, the position of Société Générale was important to understand what will happen. And they were in favor of the offer of IFINT, and they were ready to sell their shares to IFINT and to the Fiat Agnelli Group. At that time also, the situation moved, and the situation moved, because, the Menselopoulos family was restructured because simply Mr. Menselopoulos, the founder of Exor, passed away. And the new head of the group was his only daughter, Mrs. Corinne Menselopoulos. And at the time, she already managed Chateau Margaux and the wine of Bordeaux, and was not really interested by the activities of Exor in the spring water or in the real estate. And she negotiated, very in a few months after the death of her father, to sell to IFINT and to the Italian group all the activities of Exor, but Chateau Margaux, and the wine of Bordeaux. So you understand, there is a position of IFIN, they wanted 20% in order to be sure to obtain the 20%, because the father, Menzelopoulos, didn't want to negotiate. They launched 100% takeover bid, and they thought that with among the 30% of the public ownership will get at least 20%, with the original stake of 30% will get a large majority of it, 51, 52, 55%. But in the meantime, after a few weeks after, Mr. Menzelopoulos passed away, and the position of the daughter, Corinne Menzelopoulos, was different. She wanted to keep and to own 100% of Chateau Margaux, but was ready to sell all the other assets of Exor and Exor itself. So they negotiated between the Italian group and Mrs. Menzelopoulos, and they signed a contract. She obtained against, the sale of the stake of the family, the 30% of the family of Exor, 100% of Chateau Margaux, plus cash, plus a portfolio of shares of diversified companies, medium size in France and in Italy. And it seemed at that time that the problem was solved. Exor was in the hands of the Italian group, Fiat Agnelli, with 35% in Sources Perrier, and with the real estate. And Chateau Margaux was out of the deal, was in the hands of Mrs. Corinne Menzelopoulos. And it was clear that the goal of the Italian group was to buy or to control Exor in order to control Sources Perrier. So they succeeded in the first step. It seemed they succeeded in the first step, but they didn't have control here between Exor and Sources Perrier. They owned only the 35% historically in the hands of Exor, not the majority. Other families were also part of the shareholders group of Sources Perrier. So then what you will see is that you find several operations, financial operations. It was not accepted by the dominant producer of water, sparkling or non-sparkling in Europe, that the Italian group, which was not in the food industry, started investing in beverages through this agreement. So it was decided by these groups to launch takeover bids, counter takeover bids. What are the counter takeover bids? You find two of them. And this is one of the most interesting parts. The first one, which is number 2 here, January 20th, 1992, was launched jointly by Nestlé, everybody knows Nestlé, and Suez, which was, at the time was a bank. And they make an offer on 100% of Perrier's capital, total equity. Have a look to the price, but also to the minimum number of shares they will accept. It means they launch an offer. If at the end of the offer they get more, they obtain more than 150% of the share, they buy the total number of shares presented at 1,475 French francs. If not, for example, if it's only 40%, they can at the last moment decide if they buy or not. So situation is different if we get the majority or we don't get the majority of shares. Okay. So this is on Perrier, source Perrier, not on Exor. Now, a few weeks later, February 21, BSN came and launched a counter offer on Exor. It was clear, more clear answer to the Italian group. That means that the offer from Nestlé was on Source Perrier in order that through Exor, the Italian group didn't acquire Source Perrier, but now there's a softened offer by BSN on Exor, which was also under an offer from Fiat Agnelli Group, the IFINT Fiat Agnelli Group. If you have a look to compare 1 and 3, the only difference is on the price. The Italian group proposed 1,320, the French group 1,420. So you have already 3 offers. Fourth offer, a few days later, 5 days later, Exor and 3 other players jointly, which were in the food industry, which were not here in the deal or in the structure before, but were also, connected through Saint Louis to the Fiat Agnelli Group. It was allies, in fact. It's like the White Knight coming in. It's like the White Knight. And this group of players, it was a consortium, and we'll see what the consortium is in Eben Amrou tomorrow, more in detail, decided to launch a counter offer on Perrier. So remember, Nestlé Suez will launch an offer with a minimum stake at a price of 1,475. And here they launch a counter offer, same price, but without any conditions. They say, okay, we will buy and pay cash, same price, but without the condition on the percentage. It means if we obtain only 20%, we have 20%. If we obtain 90%, we pay for 90%. That means when there is an offer on the market, we can make another offer, either increasing the price or eliminating, cancelling the conditions on the offer. Here are the conditions of 50%. Okay. So at that time, you had 4 different offers on 2 different companies. So if you come back to the goals of the different players, and there is a slide somewhere on the goals of the different players, we can try to have a look to the slides of the different players. Where is it? So that's the other players in the operations. You have a list here. Nestlé, Fiat Agnelli Group, VFint, Banque Lazare, which is at the same time working with BSN and Fiat Agnelli Bank, which are in opposition here. Société Générale, the largest investment fund, bank and investment fund in Exor before the deal. Crédit Agricole, which has also a small minority in Exor, and Banque Indosuez, which holds a minority interest in Exor Capital and is also the ally of the Danone here in the offer. Okay, so this is perhaps a more detailed description of the players. We have something else also, which is what I said on the IFINT, Luxembourgese holding company, subsidiary of the Fiat Group, which is a kind of diversification head of the group. Just want to show you somewhere else. This is not the one. something else somewhere. Yeah, this is for the goals, So Fiat and Enit is clear. They want to be involved in the food company. They want to create an agro-business group. And remember, they are connected with someone who seems to be a white knight here, which is Saint-Louis. Okay. They are interested in agro-business. And in agro-business here in Nexans, what is interesting for them is water supply, Source Perrier, and the regional firms. BSN wanted to buy, in fact, the Volvic brand in order to complement its range of mineral waters. And just forget that, Volvic is also a subsidiary of Source Perrier. So you have Source Perrier, regional springs, cheese, and Volvic. And Vichy also, Vichy and Volvic. Nestlé wanted to acquire a leading position on the French market in the water industry. They wanted also to get the ownership of Contrexéville Civil, which is very close to Vitel in the eastern part of France. Nestlé is the number 2 in the European market, number 2 in the French market on water supply. They own Vitel in the eastern France, which is non-sparkling water. And there is another spring, which is not very far, about 10 kilometers from Vitel, which is Contrexéville Civil, and want to buy this company, which is also belonging to Source Perrier. And they wanted to buy Perrier spring because Perrier is very well known in the US. It's exported, you produce bottles of sparkling water in France, you put that on a boat or in a flight, and you send them to the US. Okay, and very good margin, very good price, very good brand, very well known in the US. Okay, so they wanted to acquire this sparkling water and develop its business into the US. So the goals were quite different. So let's come back to the operations themselves. Just perhaps to have a few words. I forgot a few points. Source Perrier, so owns Source Perrier itself, the regional springs I showed you, but also Volvic, which is the largest natural non-sparkling water spring in Europe. Vichy, which is sparkling water and a resort, also for tourism, there's a lake, it's also a medical spring, and they all cheese production with Gave de Roquefort. Yeah. So that's the interest of the different players. That's the first operations. Now you have the operations, and you have a feeling that perhaps the problem will be solved on the market by the success of the first. But that was not the case. And why it was not the case? Because you should not forget that in that kind of operations, you have, of course, the constraints. The constraints of a regulator. They want to have concentrations. That's what we have already studied. Okay, or cartels, or duopolies, or oligopolies, and duopolies will appear again at the end of case. But also you find other kind of problems. For example, here, probably you were interested by this loop here, 13%. What is it? It means that Source Perrier has got subsidiaries. Source Perrier is a producer of sparkling water with the bottle of Perrier, but owns subsidiaries. It means there is a Volvic subsidiary, there is a Vichy subsidiary, there is a Gave de Roquefort subsidiary, and there is a subsidiary per regional spring, 25. So in fact, it's a group. Okay, and among these different firms. Some of them owns shares of Sources Perrier. It means subsidiaries own part of the shares of the mother. In fact, Sources Perrier is a mother. And the total of these shares is for 13.8%. So what will happen with the 13.8%? This was the key point which was raised. Yeah, it means in an annual meeting, do they have a right to vote? It means does Sources Perrier management can use the rights of vote of these firms to make a decision or to get a majority. So that was the first question. The second one is the 35% you see here, we call question mark. So what the question mark? And perhaps some of you will be interested, and this is one of the points of interest when you develop your stock market, this is what about the rules? And the rules are very clear in many stock markets. It means you cannot buy or sell anything or any stake without giving the information. And a large number of markets, each time you go through a multiplier of 5%, you need to communicate to market authorities and to the other investors. It means, for example, if Exor management had 32% and bought 4%, it got 36. They had to say, we have crossed this border of 35%. If they sell back 3 days after 3%, they have to say, we have sold 3%, we are back, under the 35% frontier. So all or many operations have to be clearly identified and noticed to the market authorities and to the investors. And the problem here is that Sources Perrier wanted to use the 13% right of vote, and here it seems to many portfolio managers in the market that Exor moved across borders of 5% multipliers several times without giving any information. And this was part, of the decision of the courts. And the courts decided because of course, the other players said this is not possible. The Italian group now, through Exor is trying, progressively to buy Sources Perrier or to acquire Sources Perrier using rights of votes which are already owned by Sources Perrier. This is not acceptable. And they said they don't play the game. They have to follow the rules. And of course, it wasn't accepted by Nestlé, by Danone, and some marginal shareholders, and we decided to ask the judges what they thought about that. And the judges said clearly, so you have two courts, it's a bit complicated due to the court structure. And what's happened, in fact, that the first courts in the southern part of the country, close to a spring, said, okay, we accept the question you raised, and we condemn, Exor to limit their rights of votes only to 2/3 of the original rights of vote. It means if after the analysis by the court, the rights of vote is supposed to be 35%. They get only at the end 2/3 of 35%, and they lost 1/3. And of course, if you get 22%, it's not the same thing but to get 35%. And second, which is quite more important, they said it's impossible for a firm to use, in an annual meeting, according to the law, the rights of votes in the hands of the CFOs of the subsidiaries of its subsidiaries. So the 13.8 were just eliminated, put it simply. That means at the end, instead of having a control of 35 plus 39, which is nearly 50%, the control was only 22%. And now the operation, the direct operation of acquisition of Source Perrier by Nestlé was possible. So the court in fact redefined the battlefield. That's what's happened here. In that sense, there are the arbitragists between the position of the Italian group and Exor management, who said, okay, we will use 35 plus 13, which is already 48 majority. The courts, the two courts together, said, no, you own only 22%. So that means the operation of January 20th was feasible. It was not before. In that sense, the markets had their importance. So just to conclude on that part, and we finish on the second part tomorrow. After this decision, and that's happened very often, the battlefield is redefined. And the different players, and particularly Exor management and the EFIT management, the Fiat Agnelli group, in fact, decided to negotiate. And there was a negotiation in Paris. It was in a law firm I've been working with. And it was decided by a restructuring will be organized, and acquisitions will be only the consequence of this restructuration. What does it mean? It means the EFIT will become the only owner, 100% owner of Exor, with real estate only. That means the Italian group came, in Exor to become a player in the water supply management, and at the end, they get a holding company in real estate in France. Second, Chateau Margaux was cut from Exor, and Mrs. Mentzelopoulos got 100% of Chateau Margaux plus some cash from the Italian group. Third, Source Perrier was separated from Exor. Source Perrier will become under the control of Nestlé. But Source Perrier, in this agreement, decided to sell Volvic, which is the most important spring, to Danone, BSN Danone, and also Cave de Roquefort, cheese, which were not of interest for Nestlé or BSN Danone, was bought by a bank, the Crédit Agricole, a bank of a farmer. So you have, by decision, after the arbitrage of the courts, you have by decision among the players a complete restructuration. The Italian group get Exor and real estate, Mrs. Mentzelopoulos the wine, Nestlé Source Perrier, but without Volvic given to Danone and the cheese given to the Crédit Agricole. So how to organize that? In that case, you move from hostile takeover bids to friendly takeover bids. And of course, the hostile takeover bids were cancelled. 2 friendly takeover bids were launched and succeeded. And after that, all the assets, stakes, and so on were allocated to the different partners, which were agreed on during the negotiations. So you really understand what happened. We have restructuration first, progressive restructuration, Mr. Mensilopoulos selling the assets, taking the cash, diversifying real estate, water, cheese, wine, cash, new investors coming in, particularly the Italian group, Fatanelli. After a few years, he decided, to leave. The Italian group was interested. They launched a takeover bid on 100%. They wanted only 20% to get a majority, but they launched 100%. Was a counterattack by Danone, Nestlé, and Summerlise. You had 4 hostile takeover bid. At a point in time, it was difficult to find a solution. The courts were involved because of its problems, rights of votes, and the communication to the regulator and the stock market. The decision of arbitrage of the courts had consequence a modification of the position on Exor and a decision by the Italian group to negotiate. The negotiation has for consequence, a split of the Exor Source Perrier group with assets and companies in the springs allocated to the different partners. All the hostile takeover bids were cancelled, and the acquisition was organized, according to the agreement, through 2 friendly takeover bid. That's what happened. So it seems at that stage that everything is done, it's finished. But you will see tomorrow that it's not the case, because another player will enter the deal, and this other player will be the European Union through the concentration department. This concentration department number 5, dealing with concentration, cartels, dominant positions, and so on. Okay, so this last step will be for the introduction tomorrow, and after that we will move immediately to the banking sector. So what I'm trying to do today was to go further into the Nabisco case using the last 25 slides, 25, 1, 2, 3 slides, in order to have a clear view of good practice and the warnings when I wanted to give you some more elements on the tax and management position, how to organize the group with a holding company, intermediate holdings, holding per countries, and specific holdings also, for example, for cash management. And we went also into the problems of valuation of the different assets of a deal. Here are 5 companies, and then valuation of the goodwill, what to do with the goodwill also. And then we move to this Perrier case, which is a very complex case. You will see with the last dimension tomorrow that it is one of the main pieces of the design of the European regulation of concentration, but also you understand that it is a case where you have at the same time restructuration of assets, the change of policies of families and groups, decision of courts and arbitrage by courts, 4 hostile offers, 2 friendly offers at the end. But at that point, it seems that everything is solved. But I understand tomorrow that it is not solved because they have forgotten one other dimension, which is the European regulation on and concentration. It means here and acquisitions. So thank you very much for today. I'm a bit late. Sorry for that. I know that it is very late for you. It's time to sleep, and we are working tomorrow. And we meet again at the same time as usual, which means 1 p.m. for me, 1 p.m. for me, it's 7 p.m. for you. Goodbye, good night.
Goodbye, Professor.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Professor.
Goodbye,
Goodbye.
Professor.
See you tomorrow. Good night.